Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to go through my top 3 books from the third quarter of the year. As always, I do separate my top 3 new fantasy books from my top 3 books. So when I say books, I am specifically referring to backlist fantasy as well as books from other genres. I find that this is a good way for me to ensure that my reading is balanced between new releases and things that have kind of been existing on the TBR for a while, as well as dip my toes into other genres, because I do think that I have my heart within the fantasy genre, but on occasion as a reviewer, I think one, it's great to branch out, read other things, and also just see how storytelling differs from one genre to the next. It also highlights, I think, the pros of fantasy and also where maybe fantasy isn't as strong in comparison to other books. Additionally, I just think that other books have so much to offer and that there are really wonderful things across various different genres. And so, as noted, I think this is a great way to allow for there to be a little bit more balance across the board. Before I jump into my favorites though, I would love to know what have been your favorite either backlist fantasy books or books from other genres that you have picked up within, it could be the third quarter. If there's just something you really want to hype up, feel free to do so, because I really like getting to see the books that resonate with all of you and putting them on my TBR, checking them out. I feel like it's just a fun way for us to kind of have a little bit more of a dialogue when we are reading each other's favorite stories. But on that note, let's jump into my top 3 books from the third quarter of the year. First up, we have Lady Tan's Circle of Women. This is a historical fiction story, and I know for some of you who are big fantasy fans, you prefer to just kind of pick up and hear about other fantasy stories, which is fair. If that's what you're interested in, I completely understand. But I do think that there's a little bit more overlap between historical fiction and fantasy readers than maybe sometimes we realize, as a lot of fantasy is, of course, kind of found its roots in a lot of history. And what I really appreciate about Lady Tan's Circle of Women is that the setting itself is so exceptionally well done. It is based off of a real figure in history. However, this is kind of a fictional telling of this individual's life based on a time when women were heavily restricted in what they could do with their lives, where they could go, and also specifically in this story, the passions that they could actually allow themselves to learn more about. And in the case of our protagonist in this story, she is very passionate about medicine and caring for other people. And this was somewhat instilled in her through her grandparents. She really wants to do what she can for all the other people that live within her house to ensure that they have the best health possible. But there are restrictions, even though she knows what she's talking about, even though there are some areas where it's seen as acceptable for her to chime in. There are also a lot of times when it's seen as inappropriate, or like she should just keep her mouth shut and allow somebody who is a male doctor to be the one to give his insight and his input. I personally found this book extremely powerful, extremely moving, seeing what our characters do in the face of adversity and how they overcome certain things and the very, very quiet ways that they have to try to push back and fight toward. In their own eyes, I don't even think they see it as progress. They're just trying to do what they think is right. They have so much working against them, and seeing the way that they push through all of that, I found really, really inspiring. But by no means is this character somebody who's absolutely perfect and is the most heroic individual who's tearing down all these systems. I really think it's one of those stories where it's inspiring because it shows that even though individually we feel like maybe we're not making that many strides towards progress, or maybe individually we feel like we don't have that much of an impact, this woman was exceptional, and she was exceptional because of the way that it, in comparison to everything working against her, it actually was really monumental to see everything that she was able to accomplish and everything she was able to do. It's a very heartbreaking story that kind of has a mix of a little bit of intrigue within it, as well as almost like a murder mystery at times. It actually sparked an entire video dedicated to the idea of when characters are very flawed, and how do we accomplish having these flawed characters in a way that we find ourselves caring about them, we feel endeared to them, we root for them, even when some of their more uglier sides start to show through. And how do you accomplish that feeling? It made me want to go through a deep dive with that. And if you're interested in that video, I'll have it linked. But this book sparked that, and I haven't found too many other books that really do that so well. We do have a fantasy book on the list, but I'm going to save that one for the end and stick to historical fiction, and that would be Apothecary Diaries. I know I've brought Apothecary Diaries up quite a few times, and it is a light novel series, and if you're unfamiliar with light novels, they are works that tend to be a little bit on the shorter side. They're still longer than a novella or a short story, so they are novels, but they're written in a way where the actual writing itself is fairly casual and very, very approachable, but the stories can be within all sorts of different kinds of settings. And in this particular instance, you are looking at a fictional historical version of China that kind of combines different dynasties together. And within the story, you follow a young woman named Mao Mao, who is an apothecary, and she has an extreme amount of knowledge and passion for this. And she has been sold into servitude specifically to this rear palace where there are a lot of various different consorts who serve the emperor, or at the very least they are trying to ensure peace for themselves and safety and security for themselves by gaining the emperor's interest. And in doing so, it kind of creates this natural palace of intrigue. And Mao Mao just wants to keep her head down and keep away from all of this so that she can get through her contract and then get out. But her natural curiosity and her sense of justice catches the attention of some powerful people who then essentially recruit her to help them not only solve murders, but also determine what's going on whenever there is something afoot, whenever there is some kind of mystery and intrigue transpiring. These are exceptionally funny. They are very, very silly. The mysteries are compelling, but the part of the story that I really, really love is the character work. And because of the more casual nature of the writing style, I think it fools you into thinking that it's not always as deep as you would anticipate. However, there aren't too many stories that I feel like dissect trauma within their characters in a way that truly is actually pretty subtle, because there will be times where you don't even really necessarily realize that a character's behavior is rooted in their trauma until way later, and then it makes you kind of completely look back at everything differently. And one volume in particular that not only does this really exceptionally, but also the intrigue and the twists and turns that are within this particular volume are so good that after I read it, I was messaging friends about it, and I am just so eager for my friends to catch up with me so that I can talk to them about it, because it's killing me. And volume 11. So 11 volumes in, which is a big ask for a lot of people. But volume 11 is one of the best things. I was so caught off guard, and because of the way that there's almost this sort of mystery of the week feeling to the story, you often don't know when it truly is just a one-off, this is just separate, or it's actually contributing to a greater plot, and you're constantly trying to figure out what is in combination with something else and what is separate. And you start to think, I think I've got an idea of how this author foreshadows. I think I can tell when this character says this or this character does this. It's not actually just a silly joke. Maybe there's something more to it. And you think you know. And in volume 11, it pulls the rug out from under you and it completely surprises you and shocks you. And there aren't too many stories that I find do that. And this one did it so well, on top of being hilarious, on top of having great character work, and also having a setting that I think is really, really fun to explore, but also really does the idea of your setting impacts your characters and their worldview really, really well. I think this and Lady Tan Circle Women actually are great recommendations if you like one, you might like the other, because I think the settings play an enormous role in the characters. So everything feels very seamless, and it feels like it all blends together really, really well. I've just had such a great time with Apothecary Diaries. And then last for today, we have A Fire Endless. If I'm not mistaken, I think A River Enchanted might have been an honorable mention earlier in the year, as I did really enjoy the story, I enjoyed the writing style, but it was only half of the story, as this is a duology and A Fire Endless is the conclusion to this duology. And now having finished it, I definitely think that this duology not only utilizes the duology blueprint really, really well, but I just really, really have grown to admire Rebecca Ross's writing style. I think she's efficient. I think that she is able to utilize language in a way that's really evocative. I think that she has a way of writing that is very, very beautiful without feeling purple. And I think that she writes characters that, even if you don't personally find that you resonate with the characters, or maybe your personality is different from the characters, I feel like she makes characters that feel very, very real, and that the way they interact with each other feels very realistic as well. The plot I enjoyed, and I feel like it expanded and became a lot more interesting and rich within the second installment. So if you do give this duology a try, I would say plan on reading both the first and the second. And also, I just found that the way that we have sort of these mythical beings and how it ties into the real individuals and their plights, I think how all of that was woven together was really great. In the first story, you follow a young man who is returning home to a place that is somewhat mythical in the way that these spirits interact with people and mankind overall. And he is tasked with performing, because he is a bard, for these spirits to try and gain information about some children who have gone missing on this island. Additionally, there is a long history of the other half of the island consistently being at war and at odds with the half that he is from. And so you're trying to piece together, were the spirits involved? Was it the other half of the island? Was it some combination of these things? And is there ever going to be a chance at peace? And you're not just following the perspective who is a bard, but you have a variety of other perspectives as well. And it's a story that feels like the stakes are important, but the character moments and how you get to know them feel very, very close and personal. I think it's really well done. Love the writing style. And I'm excited to read more by this author. That's it, though, for my top 3 books that I picked up within the third quarter of the year. As asked at the beginning, please feel free to let me know. I would love to know what have been your favorite books that you've picked up this quarter, or just in general, what are some books that you recommend? And if you have any recommendations based off of the books that I mentioned today, feel free to leave those. If you are looking for more in-depth thoughts about any of the books that I've mentioned, I did that video, as I talked about with Lady Tan's Circle of Women, where I talked about how we write flawed characters and settings that are really compelling but also realistic. So I have that video. I have many videos on Apothecary Diaries, and then I recently talked about A Fire Endless. So if you're interested in any of those, I'll have them linked. And if you're interested in the books themselves, I'll also have those linked too. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.